The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Eliza Hartwell realized she could no longer hide the truth that was growing beneath her corset. And the shame of it threatened to crush her spirit entirely as she stood alone on the wooden platform in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, in the scorching summer of 1882. She pressed a trembling hand against her stomach, feeling the slight swell that would soon become impossible to conceal. 3 months along now, and the memory of how it happened still made her throat tighten with disgust and fury. Marcus Bellingham had been her employer's son back in Philadelphia, a man who smiled charmingly at parties and cornered vulnerable women in darkened hallways when no one was watching. She had been naive, just 19 years old, working as a seamstress in his father's textile mill. When she had refused his advances one evening, he had not taken no for an answer. The violence of that night still woke her in cold sweats, and when she realized weeks later that she was carrying his child, the horror of it had nearly broken her. She could not stay in Philadelphia. Her parents had died of typhoid 2 years prior, and she had no siblings, no family to turn to. The thought of raising a child conceived in such brutality, of seeing Marcus's face in the innocent features of a baby, filled her with a shame so deep she could barely breathe. But she also knew she could not end the pregnancy. Despite everything, despite the circumstances, something in her could not destroy the life growing within her, even as she wished desperately that none of it had ever happened. So she had taken every penny she had saved, sold her few possessions, and bought a ticket west, as far west as she could go. Tombstone was a silver mining town, rough and wild, but it was also a place where people did not ask too many questions about your past. She hoped to find work, to disappear into anonymity, to figure out what to do when the baby came. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she gathered her 2 small carpetbags and looked around the dusty street. Saloons lined one side, their painted signs promising whiskey and entertainment. On the other side, she could see a general store, a bank, and what looked like a boarding house. Her throat was parched from the long journey, and her head felt light. She needed water, needed shade, needed to find a place to stay before nightfall. As she took a step forward, her foot caught on a loose board and she stumbled. Her bags went flying, and she would have fallen hard if a pair of strong hands had not caught her by the shoulders, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Whoa there, miss, careful now. These boardwalks are treacherous if you are not used to them." Eliza looked up into a pair of concerned hazel eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. The man who had caught her was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn Stetson. He wore dusty work clothes, a faded blue shirt and denim pants with a bandana tied loosely around his neck. A Colt revolver sat holstered at his hip, but his expression was kind, his mouth curved in a slight, worried smile. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse. "I am sorry. The journey was long, and I am afraid I am not quite steady on my feet. No need to apologize." He released her shoulders once she was stable, then bent to retrieve her bags. "You just arrive on the stage?" "Yes, just now." He studied her face, and she saw genuine concern in his expression. "You look about ready to collapse, if you will pardon me saying so. When did you last have water?" She tried to remember. "This morning, I think, maybe earlier." He shook his head. "This heat will kill you if you are not careful. Come on. The boarding house is just over there. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she is good people. Let me help you get settled." "I could not impose," Eliza protested, though she was not sure she could actually make it across the street without assistance. "It is not an imposition. I am headed that direction anyway." He tipped his hat. "Name is James Cordell. I work at the Silver Star Ranch just outside of town. Most folks call me Cord." "Eliza Hartwell." She hesitated, then added, "I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Cordell. Just Cord, please." He offered his arm, carrying both her bags in his other hand. "Come on, Miss Hartwell. Let us get you out of this sun." They crossed the dusty street together, and Eliza was acutely aware of how improper this would have seemed back in Philadelphia, accepting help from a strange man. But this was not Philadelphia, and she was no longer the girl she had been. That girl had died in a darkened hallway 3 months ago. This new Eliza was alone, pregnant, and desperate. She could not afford the luxury of excessive propriety. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure, painted white though the paint was peeling in places. A sign hung above the door. Chen's boarding house, respectable rooms, reasonable rates. Cord pushed open the door and ushered Eliza into a blessedly cool interior. A woman emerged from a back room, small and efficient-looking, with graying black hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind as she took in Eliza's disheveled appearance. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Hartwell. She just arrived on the stage and needs a room and some water urgently." Mrs. Chen's expression softened immediately. "Of course. Sit down, dear, you look half dead." She bustled away and returned moments later with a tin cup filled with cool water. Eliza drank gratefully, the liquid soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "You eat today?" Mrs. Chen asked, hands on hips. Eliza tried to remember. "I had some bread this morning." "Not enough, I bring you soup. First we get you settled. I have a room on the 2nd floor. $3 a week includes breakfast and supper. Extra for laundry. $3 a week." Eliza calculated quickly. She had about $40 to her name. That would last perhaps 3 months if she was very careful, but she would need to find work immediately. "I will take it, thank you." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good, Cord, you help her upstairs. 2nd door on the right, I bring food." Cord carried her bags up the narrow staircase, and Eliza followed, her legs shaking with exhaustion. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. It was more than she had hoped for. "Thank you again, Mr. Cordell." "Cord." "I am deeply grateful." He set her bags down and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You planning to stay in Tombstone long?" "I am hoping to find work. I am a seamstress, a good one." He nodded slowly. "There might be opportunities for that. The town is growing fast. Lot of miners struck it rich and their wives want fancy dresses. You might talk to Mrs. Patterson at the general store. She sometimes takes in sewing work." "I will do that, thank you." He hesitated at the door as if he wanted to say something more, but then just tipped his hat again. "Welcome to Tombstone, Miss Hartwell. I hope it treats you kindly." After he left, Eliza sank onto the bed, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief. She had made it. She was here. She was safe, at least for now. Mrs. Chen brought up a bowl of hearty vegetable soup and fresh bread, and Eliza ate ravenously, feeling strength gradually return to her limbs. That night, lying in the narrow bed, she placed both hands on her stomach. The shame was still there, heavy and dark, a constant weight in her chest. She did not want this baby. She could not love a child born of violence, could she? And yet, the thought of the months ahead filled her with a strange, complicated mixture of dread and something else she could not quite name. She would survive this. She had no choice. She would find work, have the baby, and then decide what to do. Perhaps she could give it to a family who wanted children. Perhaps she could find a way to disappear and start over somewhere else, leave the baby in a church or an orphanage where it would be cared for. The thoughts made her feel sick, but she could not imagine any other future. Sleep came fitfully, full of dark dreams and memories she could not escape. The next morning, Eliza woke early and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple brown calico that was beginning to feel tight around the waist. She would need to let out the seams soon. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen served a breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and strong coffee. 2 other boarders were present, both minors who nodded politely but did not speak much. After breakfast, Eliza walked to the general store, her heart pounding with nervous hope. The store was well stocked, its shelves lined with everything from canned goods to mining equipment. A plump woman with kind eyes stood behind the counter, sorting through a stack of mail. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Patterson?" The woman looked up and smiled. "I am. What can I do for you, dear?" "My name is Eliza Hartwell. I just arrived in town yesterday and I am looking for work." I was told you might have sewing work available. I am an experienced seamstress. I worked in a textile mill in Philadelphia. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up. A seamstress? Oh, my dear, you might be an answer to prayer. I have been drowning in requests for dress alterations and custom work. Can you do fine stitching? Embroidery? Yes, ma'am, I can do all of that. Wonderful. Let me show you what I have. Mrs. Patterson led her to a back room where fabric bolts and half-finished projects were stacked on tables. I have 3 dresses that need finishing, 2 that need alterations, and at least 4 requests for new dresses entirely. If you can handle some of this work, I will pay you 50 cents per project, depending on the complexity. 50 cents per project. That was fair, perhaps even generous. I can absolutely handle it. When would you like me to start? Right now, if you are able. Eliza spent the entire day in that back room, her fingers flying through familiar motions that brought a strange comfort. This was something she knew, something she was good at. For a few hours, she could forget about everything else and just lose herself in the rhythm of needle and thread. Mrs. Patterson brought her lunch and watched with approval as Eliza completed a complex alteration on a green silk dress. You do beautiful work, dear. I think we are going to get along just fine. Over the next few weeks, Eliza fell into a routine. She spent her days at the general store sewing and mending, and her evenings at the boarding house, too exhausted to do much besides eat and sleep. The work kept her mind occupied, kept the dark thoughts at bay. She was careful to wear her loosest dresses and to position herself behind tables and bolts of fabric so no one would notice the gradual swelling of her abdomen. But she could not hide forever. By the time August arrived, she was nearly 4 months along, and her condition was becoming harder to conceal. She caught Mrs. Chen watching her sometimes with a knowing look, but the older woman said nothing. It was on a sweltering Saturday afternoon that everything changed. Eliza had finished her work early and decided to take a walk to stretch her legs. She wandered toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert scrubland. The air was slightly cooler there, and she found a large rock in the shade of a mesquite tree where she could sit and rest. She was sitting there, hands on her stomach, lost in troubled thoughts when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see Cord riding toward her on a handsome bay horse. He had been kind to her that first day, but she had not seen much of him since. He worked at her ranch outside of town and only came into Tombstone occasionally for supplies. He reined in his horse when he saw her and dismounted, tying the animal to a low branch. "Miss Hartwell, afternoon." "Good afternoon, Cord." He approached slowly, as if not wanting to startle her. "Mind if I sit? Please do." He settled onto the ground nearby, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hot enough to fry an egg on a rock. Indeed it is." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, and then Cord said quietly, "You settling in all right, Mrs. Patterson speaks highly of your work. I am managing. Everyone has been kind. That is good." Another pause. Then, very gently, "Miss Hartwell, I hope you will not think me too forward, but I have noticed you seem troubled. If there is anything I can do to help, I would like to." Eliza's throat tightened. "That is kind of you, but I am fine. Truly?" He looked at her for a long moment, his hazel eyes serious and searching. "I do not think you are fine. I think you are carrying a heavy burden all alone, and I think maybe you could use a friend." Something in his tone, the genuine concern and lack of judgment, broke through the walls she had built around herself. To her horror, tears began streaming down her face. She tried to stop them, pressing her hands over her eyes, but they kept coming, months of fear and shame and loneliness pouring out all at once. Cord moved closer, though he did not touch her. "Hey now, it is all right. Whatever it is all right." "It is not all right," she choked out. "Nothing is all right. Nothing will ever be all right again. Tell me, let me help." And somehow in that moment, sitting in the shade of a mesquite tree with a man she barely knew, Eliza found herself telling the truth. The whole terrible truth. She told him about Marcus, about what he had done to her, about the baby she was carrying that she had not wanted, that was conceived in violence and brutality. She told him about her shame, about how she could not bear the thought of raising a child that would remind her every day of the worst moment of her life. She expected shock, expected judgment, expected him to stand up and walk away. Instead, when she finally fell silent, exhausted from crying, Cord simply said, "That man should be horsewhipped and thrown in prison. What he did was evil, and you have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of." Eliza looked up at him, startled. "But I am carrying his child." "You are carrying an innocent child who did not ask to be conceived that way. That child is not responsible for what happened to you any more than you are." His voice was fierce, protective. "And you have nothing to be ashamed of. Do you hear me? Nothing. Everyone will judge me." An unmarried woman with a baby. Let them judge. People who would judge a woman for what was done to her against her will are not worth caring about. She wiped her eyes, studying his face. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave for coming all the way out here alone. I know you are strong for surviving what you survived. And I know you deserve better than shame and loneliness." They sat together as the sun moved lower in the sky. And for the first time since that terrible night in Philadelphia, Eliza felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Over the following weeks, Cord made a point of visiting Tombstone more often. He would stop by the general store to check on Eliza, or he would meet her after her work was done and walk with her back to the boarding house. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 20, about drifting west and finding work at the Silver Star. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her parents, about her love of books and music. They never spoke again directly about the baby or the circumstances of its conception, but the knowledge hung between them, an understanding that required no words. Cord treated her with unfailing respect and gentleness, never presuming anything, never asking for anything beyond her company. By September, Eliza was 5 months along and could no longer hide her condition. Her dresses had been let out as far as they would go, and the swell of her abdomen was unmistakable. She waited for the whispers to start, for the judgment and condemnation. But Mrs. Patterson, when she noticed, simply asked if Eliza needed to sit down more while working. Mrs. Chen said nothing at all, just continued to serve her meals and treat her with the same brisk kindness as always. The real surprise came from Cord. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, he turned to her and said, "Marry me." Eliza's heart lurched. "What? Marry me? Let me give that baby a name and a home. Let me give you both a future." "Cord, you cannot be serious. You barely know me." "I know you well enough. I know I care about you. I know I think about you all the time. I know I want to protect you and that baby and give you both the life you deserve. But you do not love me." This would be an arrangement of convenience, nothing more. His eyes were steady on hers. Maybe it starts as convenience, maybe it grows into something more, but either way you would be protected. You would have a home. And that child would have a father who chooses him or her, who wants to raise them with love and care. Eliza's vision blurred with tears. "Why would you do this? Tie yourself to me and a child that is not yours." "Because it is the right thing to do. And because I care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone." He reached out and gently took her hand. "Eliza, I am not a rich man. I am just a ranch hand, but I work hard and I have been saving my pay. I can provide for you. We can make a life together. A good life." She looked down at their joined hands, at his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. "People will talk. They will say terrible things. Let them talk. Their opinions do not matter. What matters is that you and the baby are safe and cared for. I do not want you to do this out of pity." "It is not pity. It is respect and caring, and the beginning of something that could become love if you will let it." Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had ever dreamed possible. A chance at redemption, a chance at a normal life, a chance for her child to grow up with a father who wanted them. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." She took a shaky breath. "Then yes. Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You will not regret this, I promise you." They were married a week later by the Justice of the Peace, with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Patterson standing as witnesses. Eliza wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter to accommodate her growing belly. Cord wore his best shirt and a new bandana. The ceremony was brief and practical, no romance or fanfare, just two people making vows before God and the law. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Cord leaned down and kissed Eliza's forehead, gentle and chaste. "Hello, Mrs. Cordell. Hello, Mr. Cordell." After the ceremony, Cord took her to the small house on the Silver Star Ranch that would be their home. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy with a good roof and glass windows. The ranch owner, a gruff but fair man named Tom Hawkins, had offered Cord the use of the house when he learned Cord was getting married. "It is not much," Cord said as he helped her down from the wagon. "But it is ours." Eliza looked at the little house, at the wildflowers growing near the door, at the vast expanse of desert and sky beyond. "It is perfect." That first night as husband and wife, Cord made up a bedroll on the floor. "I will sleep here, you take the bed, I want you to be comfortable." "Cord, we are married, you can sleep in the bed." "I will sleep in the bed when you are ready for me to be there and not before. This marriage may have started as convenience, but I am going to court you proper, Eliza Cordell. I am going to earn your trust and your affection." Tears stung her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily these days. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do. You deserve everything good in this world." The weeks that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Cord went to work each day at the ranch, herding cattle and mending fences, and doing all the hard physical labor that ranch life required. Eliza kept the house, cooked their meals, and continued to take in sewing work from Mrs. Patterson. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, talking and watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Cord was unfailingly patient and kind. He helped her with tasks that became difficult as her pregnancy progressed. He brought her little gifts, wildflowers or a pretty rock he found while riding the range. He never pressured her, never demanded anything, just quietly showed her through his actions that he meant every word of his vows. And slowly, carefully, Eliza felt her heart beginning to thaw. The shame that had weighed on her so heavily began to lift, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope. When Cord smiled at her across the dinner table, she found herself smiling back. When he took her hand to help her up the porch steps, she found herself not wanting to let go. One evening in late October, as they sat together watching the sunset, Eliza felt the baby kick for the first time. She gasped and pressed a hand to her stomach. "What is wrong?" Cord was on his feet immediately, concern etched across his face. "Nothing is wrong. The baby just kicked. Here." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Wait, maybe it will happen again." They sat frozen, Cord's large hand warm against her belly, both of them barely breathing. And then it came again, a small but distinct flutter against his palm, Cord's face transformed with wonder. "That is amazing." "That is a strong little one." "Yes," Eliza whispered, and for the first time when she thought about the baby, she did not feel only shame and dread. She felt curiosity, wonder, the beginning of something that might eventually become love. Cord looked up at her, his eyes shining in the fading light. "That child is ours now, always. No matter how it was conceived, no matter what happened before, that baby is ours, and we are going to love it and raise it and give it the best life we possibly can." Eliza felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight and frozen for months. "I was so ashamed," she whispered. "I could not imagine how I could ever love this child. And now I think maybe I can. I think maybe I already am starting to." She placed her hand over his. "Because of you. Because you showed me that this baby is not defined by how it was conceived. This baby is just a baby, an innocent life, our child. Our child, Cord repeated softly. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, not on the forehead this time, but on the lips, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Eliza rested her forehead against his. I think I am falling in love with you, Cord Cordell. Good. Because I am already head over heels for you, Eliza Cordell. That night, for the first time, they shared the bed as true husband and wife, and the tenderness and care Cord showed her helped to heal wounds that Eliza had thought would never mend. As autumn turned to winter, Eliza's pregnancy progressed. She grew large and uncomfortable, but Cord was there for every moment, rubbing her aching back, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, reading aloud to her in the evenings from the books they borrowed from Mrs. Patterson. They talked about names. If it was a boy, Eliza wanted to name him Samuel after her father. If it was a girl, Cord suggested Rose after his mother. They made plans for the future, talked about adding rooms to the house, about maybe buying some land of their own someday. Tom Hawkins, the ranch owner, proved to be a decent man. When he learned that Eliza was pregnant, he made sure Cord had time off to be with her when the baby came. The other ranch hands were respectful and kind, never asking questions about the circumstances of the marriage or the baby. On a cold February morning in 1883, Eliza woke before dawn with the first pains of labor. Cord rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Miller, while Eliza tried to stay calm and remember to breathe. The labor was long and difficult. Eliza had heard stories about childbirth, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was overwhelming, coming in waves that left her gasping and crying out. Cord stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. You can do this. You are the strongest person I know, just a little longer. I am right here. When the baby finally came, as the first light of dawn was breaking through the windows, it was a boy. A healthy, squalling, perfect boy with dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Sarah cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Eliza's arms. Congratulations, Mrs. Cordell. You have a fine son. Eliza looked down at the baby, at his scrunched-up face and rosebud mouth, and felt a tidal wave of love crash over her. All the shame, all the fear, all the dread she had carried for 9 months simply evaporated. This was not Marcus's child. This was her son, hers and Cord's. Hello, Samuel, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hello, my beautiful boy. Cord was crying too, unashamed tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. He leaned over and kissed Eliza's temple, then gently touched one finger to Samuel's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around Cord's, gripping tight. He is perfect, Cord said, his voice thick with emotion. You did so well, Eliza. He is absolutely perfect. Our son, Eliza said, looking up at her husband. Our Samuel. Our Samuel, Cord agreed. Now and always. The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming. Samuel needed to be fed every few hours, day and night. He cried when he was hungry or wet, or just wanted to be held. Eliza was sore and tired, her body still recovering from the ordeal of childbirth, but Cord was a partner in every sense of the word. He changed diapers, he paced the floor with Samuel when the baby would not settle. He brought Eliza food and water and made sure she rested. When Eliza cried from exhaustion and frustration, convinced she was doing everything wrong, Cord held her and assured her that she was doing wonderfully, that Samuel was thriving, that they would figure it out together. Mrs. Chen came out to visit, bringing a basket of food and practical baby supplies. Mrs. Patterson sent a beautiful quilt she had made. Even Tom Hawkins stopped by with a carved wooden rattle. For the little one, he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with sentiment. Good strong boy you got there, Cord. You will make fine parents, both of you. As the weeks turned into months, life settled into a new rhythm. Samuel grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, alert baby who smiled and cooed and reached for everything within his grasp. Eliza marveled at every milestone, every change, every new thing he learned, and her love for Cord deepened with every passing day. The marriage that had started as a practical arrangement, a lifeline thrown to a desperate woman, had blossomed into something real and true and beautiful. Cord was patient and kind, passionate and devoted. He worked hard to provide for his family, but he also made time to be present, to help with Samuel, to sit with Eliza in the evenings and talk about their day. When Samuel was 6 months old, Cord came home one evening with a gleam in his eye. "I have news." "What kind of news?" "Tom Hawkins is getting older and he is thinking about retiring. He has offered to sell me a portion of the ranch, enough land to run some cattle of our own and build a bigger house. I have been saving my wages and I think we can manage it if we are careful." Eliza's heart leapt. Truly, our own land, a real future for us and Samuel and any other children we might have. "Other children," Eliza repeated, smiling. "I think I would like that. I think Samuel should have siblings." Cord pulled her into his arms, mindful of the baby she held against her shoulder. "I love you, Eliza Cordell. I love you and our son more than I thought it was possible to love anything. I love you too, so very much." Over the next few years, they built that future together. Cord purchased the land from Tom Hawkins and started building up a small herd of cattle. They added 2 more rooms to the house, including a proper bedroom for Samuel. Eliza continued to do sewing work, and her reputation grew. Women came from miles around for her dresses and alterations. When Samuel was 2 years old, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, just as they had planned. Rose had Eliza's dark eyes and Cord's easy smile. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help, to bring her toys, to make her laugh. 2 years after Rose came another son, whom they named Daniel. And 3 years after that, twin girls, Grace and Hope. Their little house was always full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of family dinners around a crowded table. It was not always easy. Money was sometimes tight. The children got sick or hurt themselves. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle and they had to be careful with every penny, but through it all, Cord and Eliza faced everything together. They supported each other, leaned on each other, loved each other through the hard times, and celebrated together through the good times. Samuel grew into a strong, kind boy who loved working with the cattle alongside his father. He had no idea that Cord was not his biological father, and it never occurred to Cord or Eliza to tell him. As far as they were all concerned, Cord was his father in every way that mattered. One evening, when Samuel was 10 years old, he came to Eliza with a troubled expression. "Mama, Johnny Roberts at school said something strange today. He said I do not look like Papa. He said maybe Papa is not my real father." Eliza's heart clenched. She glanced at Cord, who was sitting nearby whittling a toy horse for Grace. He met her eyes and gave a slight nod. Eliza took Samuel's hands. "Come sit with me, sweetheart. I want to tell you a story." Samuel sat, and Cord came to join them, putting his arm around Eliza's shoulders. Together, carefully and gently, they told Samuel the truth. They explained that Eliza had been hurt by a bad man before she came to Arizona, and that Samuel had been conceived from that hurt. They explained how Cord had chosen to marry Eliza and become Samuel's father, how he had loved Samuel from the moment he was born, how nothing about biology mattered compared to the bond they shared. Samuel listened carefully, his young face serious. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at Cord and said, "So you chose to be my papa." "Even though you did not have to be, I chose you," Cord said firmly. "And I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life. You are my son, Samuel." "Nothing will ever change that." Samuel thought about this, then nodded. "Good, because you are my papa and I would not want anyone else." He hugged them both fiercely, and Eliza and Cord held their son, their hearts full to bursting with love and gratitude. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Cord proved to be an excellent cattleman and their herd grew steadily. Eliza's sewing business became so successful that she was able to hire 2 other women to help with the work. They became pillars of the community, respected and admired. Samuel, Rose, Daniel, Grace, and Hope all grew strong and healthy. Samuel eventually took over the ranch from Cord, running it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. Rose married a schoolteacher and moved to Phoenix, where she opened a dress shop using the skills her mother had taught her. Daniel became a doctor, serving the people of Tombstone and the surrounding area. Grace and Hope both married local men and settled nearby, filling Eliza and Cord's later years with grandchildren. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cord and Eliza sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset just as they had done so many times before. Their hair was gray now, their faces lined with age, but their love had only grown stronger with time. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked softly. "Marrying me that day, taking on Samuel and all the complications that came with him." Cord took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Not for one single second. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You and our children are the greatest blessings of my life. I was so ashamed when I first came here, so broken, I thought I would never be whole again." "You were never broken, Eliza. You were hurt, yes, but you were always whole, you were always strong, you just needed someone to remind you of that." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me everything, a home, a family, a future. You gave Samuel a father. You showed me that I could love again, could trust again. And you gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be better than I was. You made me a husband and a father. You made my life meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. Somewhere inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, visiting for the anniversary celebration. The sounds of family, of love, of a life well lived. "That child is ours now always," Cord said softly, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "Remember when I said that, when Samuel kicked for the first time? I remember, I will never forget. It was the moment everything changed, the moment I realized I could love him, the moment I started to heal. He is a good man, they all are, good children who grew into good adults." "We did well, Eliza. We did very well indeed." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cord stood and offered his hand to his wife. "Dance with me. There is no music. We will make our own music, we always have." Eliza took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They swayed together on the porch, moving to a rhythm only they could hear, wrapped in each other's arms just as they had been for 25 years. Inside the house, Samuel watched his parents through the window and smiled. He put his arm around his own wife and pulled her close. "That is what I want for us, what they have, that kind of love that lasts forever." His wife smiled and kissed his cheek. "Then that is what we will have. They taught us well." Outside, the desert night wrapped around Cord and Eliza like a blanket. The shame and fear that had once defined Eliza's life were distant memories now, overshadowed by decades of love and joy and purpose. She had come to Tombstone broken and desperate, carrying a child conceived in violence, convinced she would never be whole again. But she had found Cord. Or perhaps Cord had found her. Either way, he had given her everything she thought she had lost. He had shown her that the circumstances of Samuel's conception did not define him or her or their family. He had chosen them both, loved them both, built a life with them that was richer and fuller than she had ever dreamed possible. And in loving him back, in building this life together, in raising their children and growing old side by side, Eliza had discovered her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for joy. She was not defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by how she had survived, how she had loved, how she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. "I love you," she whispered into Cord's shoulder as they danced in the starlight. "I love you too. Always have, always will." And as they held each other under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Eliza Cordell knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been hard, the pain had been real, but the destination had been worth every difficult step. She was home. She was loved, she was whole, and she always would be.